Welcome to the Advertising Forum. We're kicking off the new year with our new privacy series, brought to you by Mozilla.
Very few people know as much about both the mobile landscape and privacy, as well as our first guest, Eric Seufert from Mobile Dev Memo. Happy to have you join us, Eric. Welcome to the Advertising Forum.
Thanks for having me.
You, as an expert in the field, I've read a lot of your articles. I'm a follower of your content. You definitely have a great view on the industry. And so the first question to you is, I'd love to hear your take on the biggest privacy challenges in the mobile advertising industry and how we're dealing with it.
Well, I would say the challenge with privacy, is achieving workable measurement as an advertiser. I was lucky to have invested in Anonym, which is now part of Mozilla. It was founded by a team of experts to deliver like PETs for use by advertisers. But ultimately, Anonym now services essentially as a part of Mozilla or on device, right? Which is what Apple has sort of invested a lot into, and or on platform, which is what companies like Facebook and TikTok and others have invested a lot of money into. So a lot of the stuff is kind of abstracted away from the actual advertising workflow, right? It's just something that exists somewhere, and most advertisers don't consider that to be something that they necessarily have to invest into or build. Right? Like the privacy is handled by the platforms or the environments themselves, right? And so, what the advertiser has to do though is adapt with measurement. And so that's ultimately the biggest challenge is how do you, with more limited signal and sort of weakening signal, and deteriorating signal that you can assume to sort of continue, to be the case going forward. How do you actually understand what the value of your advertising is? And so that's ultimately the challenge. But in some ways it's opportunity, right? If you could do that better than other people, well, then you have an advantage, right? And so I think, but the kind of prevailing challenge, from an advertiser's perspective with privacy is just, okay, well, given less signal available to me in order to understand what the, return on investment of my ad spend is, how do I build tools? How do I build, workflows? How do I adapt my advertising strategy to enable me to make decisions that I feel contribute in an economically beneficial way to my company?
You mentioned three things. You mentioned, browser, device, and platform. Given what you've just shared with us today and the privacy challenges that exist, how can mobile advertisers find the right balance between personalized ads and respecting user privacy, especially as these, signals are starting to fade away?
Well, again, it's there's just very little that the advertiser could do either way, right? It's all kind of under control of either the platforms or the operating system or the browser operator, right? What signals they make available to people. And so, I think one approach that you've seen become much more popular in the last few years is data clean rooms, right? So it's okay, well, I've got my first party data, and then some other platform has its first party data, or some party has its first party data, and let's just find a way to link it together in a way that we both believe is privacy safe, but also be deemed to be privacy safe by whatever body is kind of regulating that. Right now in the US, we don't really have privacy laws, or national privacy laws, I should say. And so when we think about the party that's kind of regulating that behavior, it's the platforms themselves. And so, that's kind of what's left to do is just find these methodologies that you believe hew to the restrictions of whoever is imposing them, which are not governments, right? Not the national government anyway. It could be state level government. But so that's the challenge. It's okay, well, how do I come up with an approach that I believe is privacy safe, because I want that, right? I just most advertisers are not sociopaths, right? No one wants to violate people's privacy for the sake of violating their privacy, right? And or the perceived privacy, or just violating the sort of understanding that they have with the user around how their data is going to be used. No one really actively wants to do that. The question is, how do you abide by law? How do you abide by platform policy in a way that you feel best serves your interest while adhering to these restrictions that have been placed on you all with the understanding that you want to respect the consumer and not use their data in ways that they would find unexpected.
All right. So, Eric, that leads us to our next question. What are your thoughts on privacy preserving technologies like Apple's ATT framework and the actual impact that they've had on our industry? Because if they are grading their own homework and creating their own technologies, like how do we as consumers, what are the next steps? Give us just your take for those that aren't as familiar with your takes.
Well, so ATT was not a privacy enhancing technology. That was just a policy, right? And that was part of the problem. So Apple rolled this out without actually having a privacy enhancing technology to offer up as an alternative to using IDFA. And so I think, it's noble to want to be very proactive with protecting consumer privacy in ways that consumers don't necessarily express a need for or a desire for, right? There wasn't some sort of like overwhelming consumer sentiment that Apple was, heeding with ATT. I guess they were just preempting what they thought could be, some kind of like mistrust, at some point, which, fine. That's admirable. But you do need to sort of replace it with something workable, and you can. I think that's one thing that a lot of people, sort of miss here is that you can replace the old paradigm of unique identifiers, PII, being used as like the sole bridge of identity. You can replace that with cookie IDs. You can replace that with things that do preserve privacy while also retaining value, economic value, and utility. You can do that, absolutely. I mean, fairly close to 100%. And the problem with that is, everyone is going to be more mistrustful of something is more complicated. And everything that is more privacy preserving than an IDFA, than a cookie, than an email address is going to be more complicated than that. Right. And so like you run into this dilemma, right? I wrote a piece about this, when, talking about Google's transition to the privacy sandbox. By definition, anything more privacy preserving than a unique identifier is going to be more complicated than that. And anything more complicated than that is going to be more deeply mistrusted. And so, as you get into these more complex solutions that could potentially preserve utility while offering privacy, consumers just become more suspicious, right? And so you have to sell them not only on the new solution, but also why the new solution, which is incomprehensible, to, a consumer who's not steeped in this stuff, and even to a lot of practitioners, right? These are Google Privacy Sandbox, perfect example. Very, very difficult to understand. You have to convince them that like, well, okay, well, you can't at a quick glance understand what's happening behind the scenes. Just trust us. It's for your benefit, right? And we're not manipulating the data.
Well, and most users don't understand what's happening. They want their privacy. So how quickly should advertisers and platforms actually adapt? Like, what is the urgent need here in terms of change? How should both consumers change? How should platforms change? In your mind, if there was an easy button in Eric's mind, what would the easy button be?
There's a couple of things. One is, I think the easy button is get rid of latitude and longitude. Just get rid of it. Why do you need it? No one does anything economically useful with that. Get rid of that. If you got rid of that alone would, I think, solve most of the sort of like privacy sensitivities for people. You don't need it. It's not helpful for marketing targeting, and it can be exploited with extreme personal consequences. Then just get rid of it. You don't need someone's personal location to market things to them. You just don't. And anybody that claims that they can use that for improved marketing doesn't know what they're talking about. Like, there was this thing with, on Twitter, there was a Twitter space when Elon was hosting it. Right after he took over the platform, and someone's like, you know what, you know how you need to improve the platform? You need to allow me as a marketer to target someone who was at a Jiffy Lube last week. No, you don't. You don't need that. That's not going to work. If you're in a city and that Jiffy Lube is next to a Dunkin' Donuts, next to a hair salon, there's no way you can target with any sort of accuracy that's better than a coin flip the person that was at the Jiffy Lube. It's impossible. And agencies sell that, and they're lying about the effectiveness. And so just get rid of it. That's the principal privacy concern. you knew where I was in real time. And that has that's very obvious opportunities for exploitation, right? Now there's other things that are like also very concerning, right? So like if you could understand someone's app usage over time, you could potentially identify them individually, right? Now you could think about like, okay, well, like someone's using Grindr, right? Or someone's using, some like, were those apps that were used for like extramarital affairs or something like that. And then they went and did some other thing, and they did that other thing so many, and then they used Uber and whatever. Like you could find ways to just in the extended period of usage, you could find ways to essentially identify them individually. Now, okay, that's a data retention issue. Don't allow this data to be used for that long. Now, this is the idea of like a privacy budget. Like there's things that you can collect so many things, and like once you exceed that, you have to like delete something in order to collect another thing, right? So like that's a fairly easy concept to implement. But I think there's like, to me, it's like the easy button is just get rid of latitude and longitude in the bid request. If you got rid of that, I think that's the principal privacy concern for most consumers. And if you said, look, we cannot track you in the real world, your location, we cannot do that. I think that is the principal issue that most people have with the idea of their data being collected and aggregated in that way.
Amazing. Eric, that was fantastic. Get rid of lat and long. It's that easy. That's your easy button. This has been fantastic. We really appreciate you coming on the show, sharing your knowledge with us. ATG to you.
Eric, thank you again for being here. Again, to our sponsors, Mozilla, thank you for sponsoring this series on privacy. On our next episode, we'll be chatting with Manisha Mithal from Wilson, Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati Law Firm for a legal and policy point of view. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, everybody.